Hello there and welcome to the Weather Studio Live. It's 1 p.m, it's Tuesday and I'm Clare and Aidan.
I'm Aidan McGivern. We're broadcasting live from the Met Office headquarters in Exeter. We're live across social media. Please do send in your questions and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. We've got a busy show today again.
We haven't got any Wall of Wisdom today. Alex is taking a day off, a rare day off, I should say. So
he's getting some rest.
Yeah, so do I actually, because he does work so hard, doesn't he? But we've got a lot coming up on the show. Globally, there's been some lively weather happening across the world, which we'll be talking about. We've got a really interesting guest who did something extraordinary last December. More about that in a moment.
And the UK's weather, it's fairly straightforward over the next couple of days, but then it all gets very complicated heading into the weekend. We'll be looking at the uncertainties, whether you'll stay wet or dry, or indeed very wet. Some places could be, but yeah, we'll be tearing apart all the details for that a little bit later on. But first, let's take a look at what's happened over the last 24 hours over the UK, because actually many places have been dry, and that's not something we've been able to say a lot over the last few weeks. It's been very unsettled, but this week, although the weather's still relatively changeable, thankfully we're seeing more prolonged dry spells, and this is the satellite and radar imagery for the last 24 hours. This is through the early hours of Tuesday, and we've seen a different face to autumn, haven't we? We saw a chilly start and some fog patches, not widespread, just a few for southern parts of England as we started off Tuesday. There was some fog at Exeter Airport as I drove past this morning. And you were talking about some low cloud, weren't you?
Yeah, our friend Chris Page, who works across in East Anglia, said that fog only lifted to low cloud in the last hour or so, but now the sun is trying to get through, so that's great. So yes, we are seeing some brighter skies. You can see that on the satellite picture, can't you?
Further north, there's been too much cloud and a bit too much of a breeze, really, to see fog this morning. And we've got some wet weather there in the far north of Scotland. Now, what's interesting here, these colours are across, say, the Irish Sea into parts of northern England on the radar. Actually, that's not reaching the ground. So the radar instruments are picking up that rain. It is coming out of a cloud, but the cloud there is about 12,000 feet high. So that's not actually falling as rain in most places. Perhaps the odd spot might squeeze through. But there is some very heavy rain. Now, let's rewind this a little bit, because you can see something quite dramatic taking place over the Iberian Peninsula. So if you take a look at this area here, and if I press play, over the last 24 hours, this plume, huge area of cloud just coming out of nowhere, really vigorous low pressure system forming. Let's put on top the jet stream, and you can see this hook-like jet stream diving to the south over the Iberian Peninsula. Playing that forward again, you can see how the jet stream effectively picks up that weather system, that area of cloud, and develops into quite a deep area of low pressure and a lot of rainfall. It's
really concerning actually, because there's no shift in the upper air pattern or even at lower levels. So the rain and the thunderstorms are likely to be relentless, and there's going to be some issues and some impacts from that, aren't there? Yeah,
like you say, it's going to stick around for some time. It's what we call a cut-off upper low. So there's the main branch of the jet stream there, and this essentially forms a little pool in the upper atmosphere where the jet stream flies around 30,000 feet or thereabouts. And within that, we've got a surface area of low pressure, and where the two coincide, you've got all this uplift in the atmosphere over the top of some fairly humid air coming off North Africa. So you've got the humid air in place there coming over warm seas of the Mediterranean, the surface low pressure, the upper low pressure, all the ingredients there to produce copious amounts of rainfall. And if we put the rainfall on, take the jet stream off, then play it through.
Look at that, that's ridiculous.
So this is Tuesday night, this is tonight.
What sort of numbers are we talking about here?
Well, between Wednesday and Thursday, so that's when northeast Spain, southwestern parts of France in particular are affected. We're talking 50 to 100 millimetres widely, but in some places, in some of the wetter places, 300 to 400 millimetres of rainfall. So risk of flooding, risk of landslides. Really severe weather happening.
Frequent lightning, which is actually a massive hazard as well.
Multi-cell thunderstorms likely there. It then does eventually pull away into Italy, Corsica, Sardinia, so some wet weather expected there later this week. But yeah, our attention during really the rest of Tuesday into Wednesday especially is on this part of Spain into France, somewhere between, say, Barcelona and Montpellier. around those areas could see just really, really wet weather.
Which is worrying because obviously for the UK, some of us are on half term, a lot of people heading to the Mediterranean for a last blast of sun. Obviously, we'll keep you posted on our social media channels. We'll be watching that. Our global guidance unit's keeping a keen eye as well. And as Aidan said, it is eventually clearing. But before that, we could see some quite significant impacts, particularly sort of roads become rivers. It's that sort of amount of rainfall we could see, particularly with the Pyrenees being so close by and the Alps as well.
Yeah. I suspect we'll see some very dramatic footage, some images and movies coming out of that part of the world over the next couple of days. It is somewhat linked to our weather because this is late Wednesday and you can see the weather fronts, they're tying themselves up into knots somewhat, but they're starting to push towards the UK and we're getting a little bit of that extra humidity coming into the southeast of England. So perhaps a warmer feel late Wednesday for southeast England, but also a lot of extra cloud, and then we'll get some rain that you could basically trace all the way back to the Western Med by Thursday into the southeast of the UK.
Now, we're getting some quite interesting questions coming in already. Thank you very much for your comments and questions. Keep them coming in. We've got George upstairs, which is feeding them down to us. Will there be any warm weather for this Halloween? Well, we'll be talking about the weather into next week in a little while, so stay tuned to that. I've noticed it's getting colder. Do you think we'll see some snow this year? Well, again, we could actually use the S word at some point during the forecast, perhaps.
We could.
Well, the chief was...
Be a whisper of it.
A whisper, yes, a flake or so of that. But anyway, we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So we're not teasing you. This is just something which we're talking about in a while. And yes, Adam Blunden is saying, I've got a question for you about northern blocking next week.
Oh, yeah.
Do you believe it's going to get colder? Well...
We'll be talking about that in a little bit.
Again as well. It's my wedding day on Saturday in Chepstow. Hello, Dawn Robert Mills on Facebook. What's the weather likely to be? There is a weather warning out Friday into Saturday.
A lot of uncertainty.
Yeah. Okay.
And wet weddings are great.
Mine was sleet.
Great
basically.
photos. My sister's a wedding photographer and she says wet weddings are the best for photographs. So if it is wet, but there's a lot of uncertainty. We'll be talking more about Saturday.
Okay. Let's talk about something which happened, was it last night or the night before, thousands of miles away from here, but has consequences for us in sort of an indirect way.
In an indirect way in terms of the uncertainty actually leading up to the weekend, because at the moment we've got fairly lively weather over the States. Now this is midweek, so let's rewind it to the time being. And at the moment we've got low pressure moving across North America. Now, at the weekend, we had a similar situation, and what we saw were some very lively thunderstorms and quite a remarkable tornado in Dallas. Not unusual for this time of year, particularly to get tornadoes in Dallas. However, this one produced some amazing imagery and some movies. It happened at 9:30 in the evening, so it was in the dark, and these movies came out. You could basically only see it when you had the flashes of lightning. Take a look at this. When you see a flash of lightning, just crazy. And this moved through quite a populated part of Dallas. Thankfully, no fatalities. They were sufficiently warned by their local weather service, and there were a lot of houses that were sadly damaged or devastated, but thankfully no fatalities. It was an EF3 tornado and reckoned to have winds about 140 miles an hour, so really powerful. And
in fact, on CBS News in the last hour reported that during the Dallas tornado, a baby girl was born by candlelight in a laundry room in Dallas. So yes, something good came out of something quite exciting for us looking at it, but also very, very scary.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah.
Some lively weather on the other part of around the other side of the Atlantic, and there are further thunderstorms and tornadoes expected over the next 24 hours, which could have implications on the shape of the jet stream and therefore the actual weather that affects us heading into the weekend. So we'll be talking more about that in a moment. But let's go back home.
Yeah, let's take a look and see what's happening across the North Atlantic, the tropical North Atlantic. And there's a reason why I'm asking you, Aidan, because at this time of year, it's still hurricane season, isn't it? Hurricane season stretches from June to the end of November. Not much going on here, but there's some lively thunderstorms here. You can see that from the satellite picture. And the reason why I'm asking you is because something very interesting happened last December across the tropical waters of the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
A colleague of ours actually rowed from the east towards the west. I think it was around 3,000 miles.
Canary Islands.
Canary Islands, yeah.
Antigua.
And she's a guest with us this lunchtime. Kate Salmon, please come in.
Hello.
Hello.
And welcome to the Weather Studio.
Thank you.
First of all, tell us what you do here at the Met Office.
So I work in applied science in the Met Office. So in applied science, we take weather and climate information and we tailor it into a useful format for decision makers in industry, in developing countries who have an interest in becoming more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So for instance, in South Asia, I'm currently working on a project looking at how climate change could affect the water sector, and people in those countries are interested in trying to adapt to that.
Right, so talking about water, one of the other keen interests you have is the plight of the oceans with plastic pollution.
Yes.
And that was maybe your main incentive for embarking on this incredible trip. Tell us about how it started.
Yeah, so I met 3 other women who wanted to row across the Atlantic, and because we all loved water sports, we were all rowers or we'd been on the water, we saw the damaging effects that plastic pollution had on our coastline, and so we thought, what better way of drawing attention to that problem by actually rowing an ocean and seeing the impact of plastic in the ocean.
Well, that's the route there that you took. How many miles is that, would you say?
So it's about 3,000 miles.
Right. How much training did you do to get to a point where you could actually row that far?
We had to basically plan it about 2 years in advance.
Wow.
So that means you have to do all of the, not just the actual physical training for it, but the mental preparation, getting the safety training, acquiring all the equipment and the boat itself.
Right.
And so that in entirety took about 2 years.
How much training did you do? Given that you work full time as well.
I know. Well, we all, so I did it with 3 other women. We all had full-time jobs. And it was difficult to fit around our full-time jobs, but I would say we did something every day, maybe 1 to 2 hours a day. We would be doing weights in the gym, or sitting on the rowing machine, or doing some kind of cross training.
You had rowed across open waters before, because I believe you rowed across the Channel.
Yes.
How many miles is that?
That's only about 25-30 miles. So,
right.
And I did that in a big heavy wooden boat, so that took a bit longer than it would do in the boat that we rowed across the Atlantic in, which is a bit lighter. So the Atlantic took us 43 days. So yeah, this is an example of the boat that we rowed in. So you can see we had 3 rowing positions here, and then we had a small sleeping areas at either end, which, if you go back, were very much like sleeping in a coffin. So there wasn't much room for manoeuvre in those cabins.
Wow.
And how many of you, so did you take it in turns to sleep and row and?
Yeah, so we typically have 2 people rowing for 2 hours, and the other 2 would be sleeping for 2 hours, and then we'd swap. So that went on for the entire crossing, which took about 6 weeks.
Wow.
So we never got more than 1 hour and a half of sleep in one go.
As well as all that.
Let's talk about the weather first of all, because obviously you set sail, and it was a race, wasn't it? It wasn't just you guys, it was actual proper rowing race.
It was a rowing race, so we were rowing against lots of other teams. So I think there were 38 boats in entirety, which was quite nice because you had that camaraderie between the teams. But we wanted to win, so we did end up becoming the first all-female team to cross the finish line last year.
Very impressive.
Which we were really happy about. But the weather that we experienced along the way was very variable. So we had water like this.
So that one doesn't work.
It doesn't exist. Sorry. Well, you can see.
It's a gentle sunset.
It's a beautiful picture of a sunset.
Calm.
Very calm, and you think, I'm thousands of miles offshore, and yet it looks like a lake. And that was very difficult rowing conditions because you have this very heavy boat, and it's like it's like rowing through mud, basically, when the water's very flat.
Okay.
But
so that's not ideal.
No.
it's not ideal, contrary to what people think. But it did mean when we had flat water like that, it did mean we got to see some fantastic wildlife. So we have some whales here that followed us for 2 to 3 hours during those conditions. And then they were interspersed, so times like that were interspersed with times like this where you have these very intense squalls at sea. So you can see the big waves here, and they would last for about anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes. I think this one followed us, so actually it lasted for more like 45 minutes. So we were just under this very intense rain cloud, being absolutely soaked, and it was very windy. But it was quite good for us because it gave us a kick in the right direction.
Yeah.
And the reason why this race happens in December is because obviously you lose the hurricane risk,
yes,
and you gain some proper trade winds.
That's right, yeah. So you have the northeast trade winds which come across from this Canary Islands direction to the Caribbean. And that is a really good thing when you're rowing because, you know, that wind can push you along with the swell towards the direction you want to head in. So,
but weather doesn't always play by the rules, does it?
No, it doesn't. So the year that we did it, we had very sporadic trade winds. So they would blow for about 4 to 5 days, and then we'd have about 3 days of like this dead calm water. But the year before us, for instance, they had record-breaking crossing times because the trade winds blew very strongly, consistently for the entire crossing.
What was your worst day rowing?
The worst day rowing was when we had southerly winds pushing us north, and we wanted to obviously go west. So we were being, the bow of our boat was being pushed north, and that meant we had to row with one arm for 9 hours consistently. So there were 3 of us rowing, and one of us had to hand steer. So we all had to be awake. So I think I woke up for my shift at midnight, and I didn't stop until 7 p.m. the next day.
Oh my.
And we only made about 3 miles in that day.
All that effort and you got 3 miles to show for it.
Yeah.
So obviously you were rowing for not just to win the race, and you did win in terms of you were the first female crew to cross the finish line, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
But obviously you're trying to highlight the plight of wildlife, marine life, and the pollution issue in our oceans.
Yes, that's right. So alongside rowing the ocean, we also, in our hometown of Exeter, set up a campaign to make Exeter a plastic-free city. And so that's been our job to get businesses and schools and the local council involved in reducing the amount of single-use plastic that we use in Exeter. So the Met Office has been enrolled as part of that scheme, so they are now one of the largest employers in Exeter, who are becoming a single-use plastic-free organisation, so we're really pleased about that.
Well, we watched your TEDx talk, which is online. It's really interesting. It's 20 minutes of you just talking about your trip. And particular, one thing which resonated with me, you said you saw more plastic on the rowing expedition than wildlife.
That's right. So that was one of the key messages that we took away from our rowing trip, was that every day, pretty much throughout the crossing, we saw plastic. So it was either bobbing on the surface or caught up in seaweed, or it was like a fishing net. And that was just the stuff that we saw, you know, that there's actually 90 to 99% of plastic is subsurface, so you can't see it, it's below the surface. And then, of course, you have microplastics as well, which you can't see because they're microscopic. So it's not just the stuff we can see, it's a much more global problem than that.
And we talk about that on the Mostly Weather podcast, which you're guest on this week, and Kate talks all about her trip and also the issue with plastic, which is just heartbreaking at the very least, really. And what's next for you, Kate?
So it's a good question. I am passionate about at the plastic cause, and I think the first step is really making Exeter, still recruiting businesses and schools into the scheme to make Exeter plastic free, and that will be a good first step. Okay.
I mean, as remarkable as the journey was rowing across the Atlantic, the plastic pollution issue is just, you can't get your head around it, can you?
No.
In terms of what you can do to tackle the problem. But it sounds like, at least from your work, we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think we say in the podcast, don't we, that it's although it is an overwhelming problem, it is something that we can solve, and that we can. Everyone can take individual action, and by doing that, you inspire other people to do the same. So I think it's really important for everyone to be that drop in the ocean, and collectively we will create change. So that would be my message.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Well, actually on the Surface Against Sewage website, there's loads of information about plastic pollution, loads of big numbers there and how you can get involved. But it's not just the campaign, you can do it individually as well. I mean, here in the Met Office, most things now are, we have to bring our own cups in for the water, bring our own mugs for coffee, and it's going in that direction, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's little steps, but we need to do a lot more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Kate Salmon, thank you so much for coming in, and check out the podcast and also her TEDx talk. It's really interesting. Thank you. We'll let you get on with your work. Cheers. Okay.
Let's see if there's any questions that have been sent in.
Well, one question was, who's doing the 10-day trend tomorrow? Is it you or Alex? Well, I don't think it's me, Alex, because he has...
Or you.
Wow. I can do it if you want. It's actually Aidan doing it tomorrow, and there's a lot to talk about because obviously we've had some incredibly wet weather across the UK throughout October after a wet September and some very wet weather in August. We need a little bit of a drier spell, but it's that time of year where all it takes is a bit of a dig of cold air and things can take a different turn.
Yeah, take a look at this. And it just demonstrates actually what really does it justice if we go to, say, later Wednesday. And I mentioned that humid air coming up from the Iberian Peninsula. But out to the west, we've got a very different air mass there, these blues. And it's this time of year when you can have the clash of these high humidities and these cold air masses. And they, of course, help to power a jet stream that helps to bring low pressure systems with it, but also the jet stream can become quite contorted and that leads to uncertainties and so on. So yeah, it's a tricky one come the end of the week. This is the weather chart for tomorrow, and what you'll notice is the ridge of high pressure that we started the week with, well, that's disappeared. It's essentially being pinched away by the high humidities further south coming up against these weather fronts coming in from the northwest. Now let's turn that off, and what we've got coming up next is quite convoluted. Turn on the jet stream, and it's all because, zooming out further, now I mentioned that cut off jet stream there over the Iberian Peninsula. Well, we've got another one to the west of us, so the whole thing is becoming what we call highly amplified, where rather than moving in a straight line from the west to the east, and that leads to quite straightforward forecasting of the weather because you can basically see the low pressures lined up to the west of us. What we've got is the jet stream diving to the south out near the Azores and then doing another cut-off type of pattern, a cut-off upper low. And the shape of the jet stream by Thursday, Friday then becomes crucial because it's likely to pick up an area of humidity there. Now, before we get there, actually, overnight Friday, we get a bit of a sample. A lot of people talking about whether it's going to turn cold. Well, there is a lot of cold air here over Iceland or near Greenland, and we are going to get a little bit of a taste of that over northern parts of Britain, so fairly widespread frost for northern Britain as we start off Friday. But what's more significant is this area of high humidities towards the Azores, this area here, and you can watch this. So there's the jet stream diving to the south, and this low pressure basically comes out of nowhere. You can see it deepening there quite quickly over the next few days. And this area of high humidities then starts to point, so the jet stream starts to point it towards the UK. This time yesterday, it was, well, the computer models were saying quite a different thing for where that high humidity and the resultant rainfall was going to head for the start of the weekend. Now let's play it forward. This is Friday, and heading back to the UK, you can see weather fronts pushing into parts of Wales, northwest England, weather warnings currently in force. But yesterday, the computer models were saying that that would all be quite a bit further north across western Scotland and Northern Ireland.
This is jet stream winds, by the way,
stream, yeah.
not the surface winds.
And I've kept that on because the exact, if you think about the jet stream as pointing things towards us, if you imagine the angle at which that jet stream is pointing makes a huge difference in terms of whether that rainfall's heading towards Wales or western Scotland.
Yeah.
And wherever it ends up, it's likely, because we've got this long fetch of very humid air, haven't we? And that long fetch of humid air then hits the higher ground across western Britain. and it just basically dumps its rainfall over the hills.
What we're talking about rainfall totals during that period when there's a weather warning in force?
Well, let's bring that up. But before I do, then it's worth bearing in mind that although we've got weather warnings there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment in terms of the exact position of the rainfall. And you can see that on something that we call a spaghetti chart. Now, this is a spaghetti chart because it kind of looks like a spaghetti or a child's drawing with crayons. And you can just about pick out the UK there. That's Aberdeenshire, so where I'm pointing there. That's Aberdeenshire. The rest of the UK is covered by all these scribbles. These are possible positions for the weather front. Now, what we've got on our graphics, the weather front going across Wales and northern England, at the moment, that's the most likely position for the weather front on Friday and into Saturday, not really moving very far. So across the central part of the UK. That's the orangey line there. All the other lines are different positions that different other computer models have placed that weather front. So you can see some computer models put it right up to the north of Scotland, some have it over France, but actually the majority have it over central parts of the UK. So that's why we think that kind of position is the most likely. However, given that spread, given how many different models have it in different places, we can't be that confident that it will be in that exact position. So the person who is getting married in Chepstow, there is a chance that that weather front will be much further north and we'll get the rainfall in western Scotland, or further south and we'll get it across France. And these different computer models show rainfall amounts across the UK depending on where that weather front is. So 3 different scenarios. Actually, these two, this is the UK model and this is the European model. They have the highest concentrations over Wales. So you asked about how much rainfall. From these computer models, if the weather front is lying across Wales and northern England, Pennines, Wales, likely to see 40 to 60 mils widely. And in some of the wetter spots, so some of the highest peaks across Wales, 100 mils in 24 hours.
It's a lot of rain.
The 2 main computer models are suggesting that. So that's why we've got quite high confidence, well, not high confidence, that's why we think that's the most likely situation. But this is a different computer model. This is the American model, has the heaviest rainfall much further south over France. So that lends doubt to the fact that we're seeing a lot of rainfall across central parts of the UK. But we put a weather warning out because of the potential high impact, even though it's still low confidence in terms of where that rainfall is likely to be. And we're talking about the thunderstorms over the United States. Why are they important? We zoom out. And basically, that thundery activity over the next few days is buckling the jet stream, and that leads to those downstream amplifications, essentially how up and down the jet stream is. And essentially, by the time you get to Friday and Saturday, exactly where that jet stream is pointing, those higher humidities and that amount of rainfall across western parts of Britain.
And if you add on the temperature gradient as well, you can see there's a real marked contrast between the warm and the cold air. So as the rain retreats, we will get a bit of a dig of cold air, won't we?
Yes, eventually, but it's all about when. And actually, it's one of those funny situations where we have more confidence in terms of the forecast for the end of the weekend and into the start of next week, for what happens next, basically, rather than for what happens through Friday and Saturday. So the uncertainties for Friday and Saturday, exactly where we'll see that rainfall end up. At the moment, most likely Wales, Pennines, yellow warning in force. And then how quickly it will clear through later Saturday and into Sunday. But eventually it does clear through, and you can see the cold air coming through behind the weather front, and the weather front clearing. And what's this? High pressure.
Yes.
High pressure moving in. So, quite good confidence for high pressure to build into the west of the UK for the start of next week. And this colder air, so what does that mean? Frosts.
Fog.
Fog patches. A more settled interlude for the start of next week at least, or even Sunday as well, aside from a few showers. Yeah, once we get that rainfall out of the way, and actually if thunderstorms over the US resolve themselves today and tomorrow, then we might have quite high confidence by tomorrow about what's going to happen at the weekend.
Some interesting questions coming through before we leave you for this week. Why does it seem that torrential rain is more likely in the early hours of the morning? That's Buddha UK on YouTube. Or is it, well, I think that's just perception. When things are quiet in your house hold overnight, then you're more likely to hear the rain. Intense rain can come at any time of day or night.
Yeah. And depending on the season, in the summer, you're more likely to get that in the afternoon or late evening, aren't you? As the temperatures rise at this time of year, it's a bit more random because our rainfall comes from these weather fronts. Exactly.
Charlie White on YouTube, any ideas what the jet stream might be doing in the coming weeks? Well, Aidan's just given us a hint for the beginning of next week. It's still very amplified, isn't it?
Yeah. And although it looks quite likely that high pressure will build to the west of the UK, we'll have this dig of cold air. After that, different computer models are saying very different things for around the middle to the latter half of next week. Some of them have got a southerly airflow, some of them have got a northerly airflow. What they don't have are just normal areas of low pressure moving across. So it looks likely that the jet stream will remain in this contorted state, and that leads to quite high uncertainty. And someone asked about Halloween. Well, that's next Thursday, isn't it? And at the moment, that's just off the edge of our range of predictability. So yeah, stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Finally, John Hallett, can we go down to the Canary Islands for a minute, please, Aidan? What's the weather going to be like in the Canaries over the next 10 days? A lot of people go to the Canaries at this time of year to get some sunshine before winter really sets in. What's happening? Well, that looks looking promising, isn't it? Canaries are notorious for having quite a strong northeasterly from time to time. That's their prevailing wind direction. Obviously, it's very dry as well. The air coming off the Sahara, so it's just
warmer air for the weekend.
Yeah.
And then a weather front makes an appearance later in the weekend, so
maybe a bit more cloud. So yes,
have fun.
That's about it.
Yeah.
This week.
We will, of course, keep you updated on social media. Do follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. If you don't already, you can find all the very latest updates. We'll be back this time next week. We'll have the 10-day trend tomorrow. But for now, that's all from us. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your questions. See you again soon.